one more minute. I'm surprised that our gang isn't here, but it is right before Christmas. Yeah, I texted her and said, I'll probably be a few minutes late. Don't worry about it. Just be in the front. All right, so we are still in the middle of one particular day. And the chapter is The Master's Love for His Devotees. Let me find the date. So the date is Wednesday, April 21st, 1886. Not long before he passes away, and in April it's going to be bloody hot. So it was evening. A lamp was lighted in the master's room. Amrita Basu, a Brahmo devotee, came in. Ramakrishna had expressed his eagerness to see him. M and a few other devotees were there. A garland of jasmine lay in front of the master on a plantain leaf. There was perfect silence in the room. A great yogi seemed to be silently communing with God. Every now and then the master lifted the garland a little, as if he wanted to put it around his neck. Amrita tenderly, "Shall I put it around your neck?" Ramakrishna accepted the garland. He had a long conversation with Amrita. Now, considering how ill he was and how hard it was for him to speak, this was really quite astonishing. He had a long conversation with Amrita. When the latter was about to take his leave, the master said, "Come again." Amrita, "Yes, sir. I like to come very much, but I live at a great distance, so I cannot always come." Master, "Do come and take the carriage hire from here." The devotees were amazed at the master's tender love for Amrita. The next day, M came to the garden house, accompanied by his wife and a son. The boy was 7 years old. It was the master's request that he brought his wife, who was almost mad with grief, owing to the death of one of her sons. That day, the master several times allowed M's wife the privilege of waiting on him. Her welfare seemed to occupy the master's attention a great deal. In the evening, the Holy Mother came to the master's room to feed him. M's wife accompanied her. The master tenderly asked her many questions about her household. He requested her to come again to the garden house and spend a few days with the Holy Mother, not forgetting to ask her to bring her baby daughter. When the master had finished his meal, M's wife removed the plates. He chatted with her a few minutes. About 9 o'clock in the evening, I'll make sure. It was about 9 o'clock in the evening. Sri Ramakrishna was seated in his room with the devotees. He had a garland of flowers around his neck. He told M that he had requested his wife to spend a few days at the garden house with the Holy Mother. His kindness touched M's heart. M was fanning him. The master took the garland from his neck and said something to himself. Then, in a very benign mood, he gave the garland to M. And that is the end of that chapter. It's not only the end of that chapter. The next chapter, it begins after the passing away, which is actually in August. So there are some notes that M actually took, of course, right until up to the passing, which went from April all the way into August, but they were never published. He had very short, terse, like shorthand notes that no one can really understand. They're in M's house in Kolkata. You can see them. There's just very few little things. There'll be just abbreviations for words, little scribbles, which only he could understand. So, chapter 52, after the passing away. Sri Ramakrishna passed away on Sunday, April 15th, 1886, plunging his devotees and disciples into a sea of grief. They were like men in a shipwreck, but a strong bond of love held them together, and they found assurance and courage in each other's company. They could not enjoy the friendship of worldly people and would talk only of their master. Shall we not behold him again was the one theme of their thought and the one dream of their sleep. Alone they wept for him. Walking in the streets of Calcutta, they are engrossed in the thought of him. The master had once said to him, "It becomes difficult for me to give up the body when I realize that after my death you will wander about weeping for me." Some of them thought, "He is no longer in this world. How surprising that we still enjoy living. We could give up our bodies if we liked, but we still do not." Time and again, Sri Ramakrishna had told him that God reveals himself to his devotees if they yearn for him and call upon him with a wholehearted devotion. He had assured them that God listens to the prayer of a sincere heart. The young unmarried disciples of the Master, who belonged to his inner circle, had attended on him day and night as at the Kasipur garden house. After his passing away, most of them returned to their families against their own wills. They had not yet formally renounced the world. For a short while they kept their family names. But Sri Ramakrishna had made them renounce the world mentally. He himself had initiated several of them into the monastic life, giving them the ochre cloths of sannyasis. 2 or 3 of the master's attendants had no place to go. To them the large-hearted Surendra said, "Brothers, where will you go? Let us rent a house. You will live there and make it our master's shrine, and we householders shall come there for consolation. How can we pass all our days and nights with our wives and children in the world? I used to spend a sum of money for the master at Kasipur. I shall gladly give it to you now for your expenses." Accordingly, he rented a house for them at Baranagore, in the suburbs of Calcutta, and in this place the place gradually transformed into a mutt or monastery. For the first few months, Surendra contributed 30 rupees a month. As the other members joined the monastery one by one, he doubled his contribution, which he later increased to 100 rupees. The monthly rent for the house was 11 rupees. The cook received 6 rupees a month. The rest was spent on food. The younger Gopal brought the master's bed and other articles of daily use from the garden house at Kasipur. The Brahmin who had been cook at Kasipur was engaged for the new monastery. The first permanent member was the elder Gopal, who became Swami Advaitananda. Sharat spent the nights there. In the beginning, Sharat, Shashi, Baburam, Niranjan, and Kali used to visit the monastery every now and then, according to their convenience. Tarak, who had gone to Vrindavan following the master's death, returned to Calcutta after a few months and soon became a permanent member of the monastery. Rakal, Jogin, Latu, and Kali were with the Holy Mother when the monastery was started. Kali returned to Calcutta within a month, Rakal after a few months, and Jogin and Latu after a year. The householder devotees frequently visited the monastic brothers and spent hours with them in meditation and study. After a short time, Narendra, Rakal, Niranjan, Sharat, Shashi, Baburam, Jogin, Tarak, Kali, and Latu renounced the world for good. Sarda Prasanna and Subodh joined them sometime later. Hi there, everybody. Now I'm seeing faces. Gangadhar, who was very much attached to Narendra, visited the mutt regularly. It was he who taught the brothers the hymn sung at evening service at the Shiva temple at Benares. He had gone to Tibet to practice austerity. Now, having returned, he lived at the monastery. Hari and Tulsi, at first only visitors at the monastery, soon embraced the monastic life and thus completed the list of the master's sannyasi disciples. Surendra was indeed a blessed soul. It was he who laid the foundation of the great order later associated with Sri Ramakrishna's name. His devotion and sacrifice made it possible for those earnest souls to renounce the world for the realization of God. Through him, Sri Ramakrishna made it possible for them to live in the world as embodiments of his teaching, the renunciation of lust and greed, and the realization of God. The brothers lived at the mutt like orphan boys. Sometimes they would not have the money to pay their house rent. Sometimes they would have no food in the monastery. Surendra would come and settle all these things. He was the big brother of the monks. Later on, when they thought of his genuine love, the members of the first mutt shed tears of gratitude. The new monastery became known among the master's devotees as the Bharanagore Mutt. Narendra, Rakhal, and a few other disciples were filled with intense renunciation. One day Rakhal's father came to the mutt and asked Rakhal to return home. "Why do you take the trouble to come here?" Rakhal said to him. "I'm very happy here. Please pray to God that you may forget me and I may forget you too." The young disciples said to each other, "We shall never return to the worldly life. The Master enjoined upon us the renunciation of lust and greed. How can we go back to our families?" Shashi had taken charge of the daily worship in the mutt. The Master's relics had been brought from Balaram's house, and Sri Ramakrishna was worshipped daily in the worship hall. Narendra supervised the household. He was the leader of the monastery. He would often tell his brother disciples, "The selfless actions enjoined in the Gita are worship, japa, meditation, and so on, and not worldly duties." The brothers at the mutt depended upon him for their spiritual inspiration. He said to them, "We must practice sadhana, otherwise we shall not be able to realize God." He and his brother disciples, filled with an ascetic spirit, devoted themselves day and night to the practice of spiritual discipline. Their one goal in life was the realization of God. They followed to their heart's content the injunctions prescribed in the Vedas, Puranas, and Tantras for an ascetic life. They spent their time in japa and meditation and study of the scriptures. Whenever they would fail to experience the divine presence, they would feel as if they were on the rack. They would practice austerity, sometimes alone under trees, sometimes in the cremation ground, sometimes on the bank of the Ganges. Again, sometimes they would spend the entire day in the meditation room of the monastery in japa and contemplation. Sometimes they would gather to sing and dance in a rapture of delight. All of them, and Narendra particularly, were consumed with a desire to see God. Now and then they would say to each other, "Shall we not starve ourselves to death to see God?" Well, that's the end of that day. Okay. The next day is Monday, February 21st, 1887. Narendra, Rakhal, Niranjan, Sharat, Shashi, Kali, Babaram, Tarak, and Sarda Prasanna were living at the monastery. All day the members had been fasting in observance of the Shivaratri. Sharat, Kali, Niranjan, and Sarada were planning to go to Puri the following Saturday on a pilgrimage to sacred Jagannath. Jogan and Latu were at Vrindavan and had not yet seen the new place. Narendra had gone to Calcutta that morning to look after a lawsuit in which his family had been involved since the death of his father. At 9 o'clock in the morning, M arrived at the mutt. Tarak saw him and began to sing in praise of Shiva, Rakhal joining him. There Shiva dances, striking both his cheeks, and they resound, ba-ba-boom. Deemi, deemi, deemi sounds his drum. A garland of skulls from his neck is hanging. In his matted locks the Ganges hisses. Fire shoots from his mighty trident. Round his waist a serpent glitters, and on his brow the moon is shining. Rakhal and Tarak danced as they sang. Narendra had recently composed the song. Shashi finished the morning worship in the shrine. Sharat then sang about Shiva to the accompaniment of the tampura. Narendra had just arrived from Calcutta. He had not yet taken his bath. Kali asked him, "What about the lawsuit?" "Why should you bother about it?" Narendra replied sharply. Narendra was smoking and talking to M and the others. He said, "Nothing can be achieved in spiritual life without the renunciation of lust and greed. Woman is the doorway to hell. All people are under the control of women. The cases of Shiva and Krishna are quite different. Shiva turned his consort into a servant. Sri Krishna led a householder's life, but how unattached he was. How quickly he renounced Vrindavan and the gopis, Rakhal. But how he renounced Dwaraka too, where he was king." Narendra took his bath in the Ganges and returned to the monastery. He carried his wet cloth and towel in his hand. Sarda prostrated himself before Narendra. He too had been fasting on account of the Shivaratri. He was going to the Ganges first. Narendra entered the worship room and prostrated himself before the picture of Sri Ramakrishna, who was daily worshipped there as the deity. For a few minutes he was absorbed in meditation. The devotees assembled in a room and began to converse. The talk turned to bhavana. Narendra said, People like him live like worms in the world. It was afternoon. Arrangements were being made to worship Shiva in the evening. Leaves of the bell tree were gathered for the worship. Bell wood was chopped for the homa. In the evening, Shashi, who was in charge of the worship of the monastery, burned incense before the pictures of the various gods and goddesses. The worship of Shiva was to take place under the bell tree at the monastery compound. The deity was to be worshipped 4 times during the 4 watches of the night. The brothers assembled under the bell tree. Bhupati and M were also present there. One of the younger members of the Mat was in charge of the worship. Kali was reading from the Gita. Now and then he argued with Narendra. Kali, I alone am everything. I create, preserve, and destroy. Narendra, how is it possible for me to create? Another power creates through me. Our various actions, even our thoughts, are caused by that power. M to himself. The master used to say, as long as a man feels that it is he who meditates, he is under the jurisdiction of the Adya Shakti. Shakti must be acknowledged. Kali reflected in silence a few moments and then said, the actions you are talking about are illusory. There is not even any such thing as thought. The very idea of these things makes me laugh. Narendra, the I that is implied in I am he is not this ego. It is that which remains after one eliminates mind, body, and so on. After completing the recital of the Gita, Kali chanted, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Narendra and the other devotees stood up and circled round and round the tree, singing and dancing. Now and then they chanted in chorus, Shiva Guru, Shiva Guru. It was midnight, the 14th day of the dark fortnight of the moon. Pitch darkness filled all the quarters. Men, birds, and animals were all hushed into silence. The young sannyasis were clad in Garawa robes. The word Shiva Guru, chanted in their full-throated voices, rose into the infinite sky, like the rumbling of spring clouds, and disappeared into the indivisible Satchidananda. The worship was over. The sun about to rise, was painting the eastern horizon crimson. In the sacred twilight, the conjunction of day and night, the holy Brahma Muhurta, young worshippers finished their baths in the Ganges. It was morning. The devotees went to the shrine room, prostrated themselves before the deity, and gradually assembled in the big hall. Narendra was clad in a new ochre cloth. The bright orange color of his apparel blended in the celestial luster of his face and body, every pore of which radiated a divine light. His countenance was filled with a fiery brilliance, and yet touched with the tenderness of love. He appeared to all as a bubble that had risen up in the ocean of absolute existence and bliss, and assumed a human body to help in the propagation of his master's message. All eyes were fixed on him. Narendra was just 24 years old, the very age at which the great Chaitanya had renounced the world. Balaram had sent fruit and sweets to the monastery for the devotees' breakfast. Rakal and Narendra and a few others partook of the refreshments. After eating 1 or 2 morsels, some of them cried out, "Blessed indeed is Balaram." All laughed. Narendra now began to joke like a child. He was imitating Sri Ramakrishna. He put a sweet into his mouth and stood still as if in samadhi. His eyes remained unwinking. A devotee stepped forward and pretended to hold him up by the hand, lest he should drop to the ground. Narendra closed his eyes. A few minutes later, with the sweetmeat still in his mouth, he opened his eyes and drawled out, "I am all right." All laughed loudly. Refreshments were now given to everyone. Am looked on this wonderful mart of happiness. The devotees shouted joyfully, "Jai Guru Maharaj." And now we go to Monday, March 25th, 1887. M arrived to the Bharanagara Mutt to visit his brother disciples. Devendra accompanied him. M had been coming to the monastery very frequently, and now and then had spent a day or two. The previous week he had spent 3 days at the Mutt. He was very eager to observe the spirit of intense renunciation in these young men. It was evening. M intended to spend the night at the monastery. Shashi lighted a lamp in the worship room and chanted the name of God. Next, he burned incense before all the pictures of the gods and goddesses in the various rooms. The evening service began. Shashi conducted the worship. The members of the Mat, with him and Devendra, stood with folded hands and sang the hymn of Arati. When the worship was over, Narendra and M became engaged in conversation. Narendra was recalling his various meetings with Sri Ramakrishna. Narendra: one day, during one of my early visits, the master, in an ecstatic mood, said to me, "You have come! How amazing!" I said to myself, "It is as if he has known me for a long time." Then he said to me, "Do you ever see light?" I replied, "Yes, sir. Before I fall asleep, I feel like a light revolving near my forehead." M: do you see it even now? Narendra: I used to see it frequently. In Jadoo Malik's garden house, the master one day touched me and muttered something to himself. I became unconscious. The effect of that touch lingered with me for a month, like an intoxication. When he heard that a proposal had been made about my marriage, he wept, holding the feet of the image of Kali. With tears in his eyes, he prayed to the Divine Mother, "Oh, Mother, please upset the whole thing. Don't let Narendra be drowned." After my father's death, my mother and brothers were starving. When the master met Ananda Guha one day, he said to him, "Narendra's father has died. His family is in a state of great privation. It would be good if his friends helped him now with money." After Ananda had left, I scolded him and said, "Why do you say all those things to him?" Thus rebuked, he wept and said, Alas, for your sake, I could beg from door to door." He tames by his love. Don't you think so? M: there is not the slightest doubt about it. His love was utterly unselfish. One day, when I was alone with him, he said something to me. No one else was present. Please don't repeat it to anyone here. M: no, I shall not. What did he say? Narendra: he said, "It is not possible for me to exercise occult powers, but I shall do so through you." What do you say? No, I replied, you can't do that. I used to laugh at his words. You must have heard all those things from him. I told him that his visions of God were all hallucinations of his mind. He said to me, "I used to climb to the roof of the kuti and say, 'Oh, devotees, where are you all? Come to me, oh devotees, I'm about to die. I shall certainly die if I do not see you.' And the Divine Mother told me, 'The devotees will come.' You see, everything is turning out to be true." What else could I say? I kept quiet. One day he closed the door of his room and said to Devendra Babu and Girish, referring to me, "He will not keep his body if he is told who he is." M: yes, we've heard that. Many a time he repeated the same thing to us too. Once you came to know about your true self in Nirvikalpa Samadhi at the Kasapur garden house. Isn't that true? Narendra: yes. In that experience, I felt like I had no body. I could only see my face. The master was in the upstairs room. I had that experience downstairs. I was weeping. I said, "What's happened to me?" The elder Gopal went to the master's room and said, "Narendra is crying." When I saw the master, he said to me, "Now you have known, but I'm going to keep the key with me." I said to him, "What is that happened to me?" Turning to the devotees, he said, "He will not keep his body if he knows who he is. But I have to put a veil over his eyes." Oh, he said, "But I have put a veil over his eyes." One day he said to me, "You can see Krishna with your heart if you want." I replied, "I don't believe in Krishna or any such nonsense." Both M and Narendra laugh. Actually, in the Bengali, he goes, "I don't believe in all that Krishna Fishna nonsense." I have noticed a peculiar thing. Some men, objects, or places make me feel as if I've seen them before, as in of a previous birth. They appear familiar to me. One day I went to Sharat's house in Calcutta on Amherst Street. Immediately I said to Sharat, "This house seems familiar to me. It seems to me that I've known the rooms, the passages, and the rest of the house for many, many days." I used to follow my whims in everything I did. The master never interfered. You know that I became a member of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. Yes, I know that. Narendra: The master knew that women attended the meetings of the Brahmo Samaj. A man can't meditate with women sitting in front of him. Therefore, he criticized the meditation of the Brahmo Samaj. He didn't object to my going there. But one day he said to me, "Don't tell Rakal about my going there. Don't tell Rakal about your being a member of the Brahmo Samaj, or he too will feel like becoming one." M. You have greater strength of mind. That is why the master didn't prevent your going to the Samaj. Narendra. I have attained my present state of mind as a result of much suffering and pain. You have not passed through any such suffering. I now realize that without trials and tribulations, one cannot resign oneself to God and depend on Him absolutely. Well, X is so modest and humble. He is totally self-effacing. Can you tell me how I can develop humility? M. Speaking about your ego, the master said, "Whose ego is it?" Narendra. What did he mean? A friend one day said to Radhika, "You are egotistic. That is why you went to Krishna." Whereupon another friend said to the first, "Yes, Radhika is egotistic, no doubt, but whose ego is it?" What she meant was that Radha was egotistic because she regarded Krishna as her Lord. It was Krishna himself who kept that ego in Radha. What the master meant was that it is God alone who has kept this ego in you, so that he may accomplish many things through you. Narendra. But my ego loudly proclaims to all that I have no suffering. M. Smiling. You may loudly proclaim it if that is your sweet will. The conversation turned to other devotees. Narendra. The master said about Vijay Goswami, he is knocking at the door. M. That is to say, he has not yet entered the room. At Shampukor, Vijay said to the master, "I saw you at Dhaka in this tangible form, in this very body. You were there too." Narendra. Devendra Babu and Ram Babu want to renounce the world. They are trying hard. Ram Babu told me privately he would give up the world after 2 years. M. After 2 years, after making provision for his children? Narendra. Besides, he will rent his present house and buy a small house. Other relatives will arrange his daughter's marriage. M. Gopal is an exalted state of mind, isn't it? And that refers to Nitya Gopal. Narendra, what do you mean? M. So much emotion, so much weeping, and such exaltation in the name of God. Narendra. Does mere emotion make a man spiritually great? Youngsters like Kali, Sharat, Shashi, and Sarda are much more spiritual than Gopal. How great their pronunciation is. Gopal does not accept the master, does he? M. That is true. The master remarked that Gopal does not belong to the circle of his devotees. But I saw him show great reverence for Sri Ramakrishna. Narendra. What did you see? M. At that time, I was just becoming acquainted with Sri Ramakrishna. One day after the meeting of the devotees in his room had broken up, I came out and saw Gopal on the footpath, kneeling with folded hands before the master. The moon was shining brightly overhead. It was the red path sprinkled with brick dust, just outside the long veranda north of the master's room. Nobody else was there. It appeared to me that Gopal had taken shelter at Sri Ramakrishna's feet, and the master was encouraging him. Narendra. I didn't see it. And further, the master used to say, Gopal is in the state of Paramahamsa, but I also distinctly remember his forbidding Gopal to be intimate with women devotees. Many a time he warned him about it. Narendra. Speaking to me about Gopal, the master asked why, if Gopal was a real Paramahamsa, he should hanker after money. He doesn't belong to this place, the master said. Those who are my own will come here. He used to be angry with T because he was Gopal's constant companion and didn't come to the master more often. Gopal has spiritual realizations, no doubt, the master said to me, but he's not attained them all of a sudden, but he has attained them all of a sudden without the necessary preparations. He is not one of my own. If he is, then why haven't I wept for him? Some are proclaiming Gopal as a reincarnation of Nityananda, but times without number the master said to me, in me alone are embodied Advaita, Chaitanya, and Nityananda. I'm all these three. And that is the end of that day. Are there any questions or comments? Anything anyone wants to discuss? Yeah. Yeah, he, yeah, those were actually two different experiences. He talked about one just in brief, just touched on it, and then he immediately went to the next one, where that was later.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay. You don't hear much about the one at Jadu Malik's house. I'm actually not remembering that at all.
I think that's the one he touched the first, touched the second time, and the third time I think he was that the one. Yeah, I
That was
myself.
at Dakshineshwar, right? When he touched him a few times and then he forgot
It
who
was
his
no,
mother was.
it was actually at Jadu Malik's, which is right kind of next door.
Right, right, right. Okay. Huh.
All right. Well, let's see. We've got tomorrow. We will have a lecture at 11 a.m. on tidings of comfort and joy. On Christmas next Wednesday, we will have a readings from for Seekers of God. On the Christmas Eve, which is Friday. Is that a Friday? Yes, Christmas Eve, there will be sing-along Christmas carols. You can either join remotely or you can show up here in person and sing along as long as you wear a mask. And on Sunday will be, no, that'll be Saturday. There will be the Christ Puja at 11:30 a.m. with just prasad and ham. And then on Sunday, we will have Holy Mother's Puja at 11 a.m., followed by the Homa fire and prasad. So it is a chock-full spiritual festival coming up. I hope you can all attend one way or the other. All right, we'll close the chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Okay, thank you for joining, everybody.